welcome back to the Anti-Slavery Collective's Working From Home conversation with Jules and Eugenie. Today, we are honoured to have Niharika Chopra on the call. Niharika is the Director of Policy for the Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation. Niharika, please could you tell us a little bit about the foundation and what you've been doing throughout COVID?
Thank you, Jules, and thank you, Eugenie, for having me and for reaching out for this very important work that you are engaged in. The Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation is a child rights organization which works across the world on creating a childhood which is free, safe, educated, and healthy. And we are founded by the Nobel Peace Laureate Kailash Satyarthi. And we focus on ending all forms of violence in the world, with a special focus on child labor, child trafficking, child sexual abuse, and other forms of exploitation in the world. I'm based out of India and New Delhi, and we are, all of us are working in lockdown mode, but unfortunately, exploitation and trafficking is not in lockdown. It's as opposed to what we would expect. Trafficking and child labor is running in full motion. And during the period of the lockdown, we have been engaged in direct relief work. We've been able to support and provide food security to over 25,000 families. This includes 72,000 children, which reside in vulnerable communities. We work in villages across the country, with a focus on source areas of trafficking is what we call it. These are areas which are specifically economically deprived. There is absence of quality education and a general lack of awareness, which causes for children to be more vulnerable to being trafficked, either for the purpose of child labor, for child prostitution, and other forms of exploitation. The relief work that we're doing is sort of as preventive action against trafficking that is happening right now, but also for the future. Being able to ensure the economic security of vulnerable families today will go a long way in preventing trafficking in the future.
Thank you for sharing that. I was wondering, because of COVID, you said that lockdown isn't preventing child labor, it's actually going up. Can you speak a little bit of some examples that our listeners might be able to sort of learn from and be aware of in the future?
Yeah. So we, while in lockdown, we actually received information of thousands of children who were trapped in places of employment. These were children who were in child labor before the lockdown started. And after the lockdown began, the employers fled and they left the children there without any wages, without any food, and without any means to escape. So a lot of our efforts went into identifying and reaching these children. And some we were able to, but there are thousands of more children like these were trapped. We identified and stopped cases of trafficking for the purpose of child marriage, which was happening across states. There was movement despite lockdown. Within villages, we understand that when families have lost, migrant laborers have lost employment and they've returned to their villages on foot very often, they've been forced to take on debt within the villages. And this debt has pushed families and generations into bonded labor. And with bonded labor is inherently slavery in its worst form. And this continues for generations, and children are then trafficked for being able to sort of repay this debt which their families took. It's a debt of a couple of thousands of rupees, which is nothing, but the bondage and slavery continues for generations.
And how does the foundation come in and actually help change that? Would you be paying off the debts, or would you be rescuing the children? I'd love to know a little bit more.
Yeah. So bonded labor is criminalized in India, right? You can't. It is not debt that legally needs to be paid off in the manner that it's made to be. So what the organization does is we provide end-to-end assistance. We look at first the prevention side. We work in the villages with communities with this program, which we call the Child-Friendly Village program. We create child-centric communities and create these children's councils within villages, which participate in the governance model of the village to integrate child labor trafficking into the policies. a lot of these villages fall within what we call in India as the mica belt. So these are areas where families are engaged in picking mica, which is on cars, on anything that's shiny is basically mica. So businesses across the world import mica from India because it produces mica in abundance. But the reality is that the mica is picked out and from areas with mines by bare hands by children and families who have no other means of subsistence. It's slavery. It's exploitative, and we work with these communities to help them become more self-sustained, and for children to be removed and withdrawn from child labor and put into school and education. So we look at the prevention side of it, but however, while creating this almost safety net around each child, should the child, despite that, fall through, we make sure that the children are rescued in time. There is the law enforcement, which we build the capacity of. We make sure that they are able to respond on time and rescue the children and provide them with rehabilitative support, which includes education, economic compensation, psychological support, to help them reintegrate into society again and to make sure that they fall into the safety net, which we hope to constantly strengthen, both through policy changes. So one unique aspect of the organization is also to be able to draw from the gaps that exist within communities, to work closely to learn from these communities and then translate them into strong policy changes with the government. So that end-to-end approach is the only way we believe that a child can be protected.
What can some of our listeners do to help you and your organization the most?
Right. So we have recently, in the past 2 weeks, globally launched this campaign. It's been launched by the Laureates and Leaders for Children group, which has Nobel laureates and global leaders from across the world. And it was initiated by our founder, Peace Laureate Kailash Satyarthi, but they've come together to urge the world to pledge and demand for the 20% of the COVID-related relief resources and financial resources to be dedicated to the 20 most vulnerable populations of the world, which includes children. So the campaign is gaining mileage. We have leaders and laureates and civil society organizations and people like you and I, who are able to then contribute and call for this action and demand from their local leaders, demand from their country heads for prioritizing children within their efforts immediately during the COVID relief as a means of prevention of slavery, but also as a more sustained effort.
And with World Against Child Labour Day coming up, I know that obviously you've got some things happening, but it's such an important moment for people around the world to know what's going on. So what would you suggest is best for people to look at, and what are you doing on that day to help end child labour?
Yeah, so our foundation is organizing a national e-summit to focus on how India, as part of the global commitment to the Sustainable Development Goal 8.7, which pledges to completely eliminate child labor from the face of Earth by the year 2025. Why that's important is also because while other sustainable development goals have a deadline of the year 2030, child labor is the only one which is prioritized and given a deadline of 2025. So what that essentially means is that until we are able to free all our children from child labor, there is no way that the global development agenda can be achieved. So we are hoping to bring government, civil society organizations, lawyers, judiciaries to a common platform to sort of accelerate India's efforts towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal. India has over 10 million child laborers and over 45 million children out of school who are vulnerable to child labor. So so the efforts, the collective effort and urgency of the issue has to be highlighted, and that's what we're hoping to do.
And has the pandemic, has COVID had a massive effect on sort of actually the health of children in India? Because obviously it's the actual issue of COVID has been affecting people with previous diseases or the elderly. And so I just wondered, how has the pandemic sort of helped or affected the work that the foundation's doing and also affected children over there?
Yeah, so malnutrition and and the absence of the lack of nutritious food is a fundamental gap in the children's health in India. And the COVID situation and the lockdown have only aggravated and sort of exposed the gaps that already existed in society. COVID didn't create the problems, it only exposed it. And these are more deep-seated issues that we're trying to counter. Yes, children are affected by the disease itself, but I think the larger humanitarian crisis, which not only India but the world is looking at, is going to deprive children of nutrition, of the right to education, of the right to a free and safe life. So the effect is more far-reaching than I think we're able to comprehend or even.
And are there some states that have been affected worse than others?
Well, yes. In terms of in terms of the disease itself, or the impact of it.
Well, both really.
Yeah. So yes, there has been. I think because states have responded differently to the situation. While there has been a nationwide lockdown, the number of cases in each state is different just because of the size of the population, the level of enforcement. All of those factors come in. However, the ongoing crisis of migrant laborers in the country is, I think, a major is a unique challenge which India is facing as opposed to the rest of the world. We have migrant laborers who live and work in the larger cities of India, like New Delhi or Punjab, or in Bangalore or Chennai or Mumbai. Now, these migrant laborers who lost their employment due to lockdown fled to their villages for survival without any means of returning there. So they've walked hundreds and hundreds of kilometers and miles on foot, and several of them died on the way. They died of starvation. Children died of starvation while walking back in the heat and without any food or money. And so I think the states the disparity between states which are the source of migrant labor and the destination of migrant laborers are facing very different categories of challenges. And the efforts that need to be made to sort of reintegrate migrant laborers into their homes, into their communities, and to provide them economic security is how different states will have to deal with it differently.
Thank you for that. Could you, Jules and I, we always talk about a story of hope from all of our people that we like to talk to, because we always think it's so important to end something hopeful. But I think for our listeners, they'd just like to know if there's a story that you have that could be hopeful, but also what they can do to right now, who they can follow and what they can do to prevent child labour from happening.
Yeah. So we actually, the organization is very proud of having survivors. Our survivors lead the way in the campaign against child labour and trafficking. The Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation social media groups have regular updates on how you can contribute, and I can provide the link to the fundraising on Keto that we are doing to be able to contribute to the rescue and rehabilitation of child laborers in India, and as well as working to be able to contribute to prevent vulnerable families to be pushed into bonded labor and trafficking. And to be able to provide these stories of hope, we have our survivors who are now working within the same villages from where they were trafficked, and raising awareness and reporting cases, and being able to prevent their communities from being pushed into the same form of exploitation that took their childhood away from them. And we have our heroes, and we have our there's this I can add. So Champa is a girl from our village who sort of worked as child labor and was vulnerable to child marriage, who came forward and made sure that her entire village was child labor and child marriage free. These are survivors who are taking the lead of change in their own villages, and these are children who we as an organization are learning from.
Wow.
Wonderful.
When you say child marriage, I know that we like to end on hope, but when you say child marriage there, like, she's completely rid it of her town, but it's obviously something that is inherently, integrated in the culture, right?
Yeah, it is. And in fact, in the context of COVID, because schools have been shut down, and 90% of the world's school population is not now in schools. So for communities that are already leaning towards withdrawing girls from school and pushing them into marriage, the fact that schools are closed down now has aggravated the issue. And with the absence of education and the absence of economic options, families are marrying their girls off at a much younger age than they should be. So the problem is inherent and is aggravated by the current lockdown.
Well, that's amazing that lovely girl Champa has managed to rid it of her tans. Thank you so much for joining us today, Niharika. We've loved it, and we'd love to hear what the Satyarthi Children's Foundation is doing. I think one of the main takeaways is that you learn from communities and then you petition government. And as you said, there's, you want to connect the whole chain of how to protect a child from labour. So that's massively important. And everyone, please watch out on World Against Child Labour Day, which is the 12th of June.
Thank you so much, Niharika. And to all of our listeners, please do follow us on Instagram, share, like. The main mission for the Anti-Slavery Collective is to spread awareness. So please help us in our mission.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Niharika.